This video will begin our study of the ancient city of Hazor. This is the site also known as Tel el-Kedah or Tel Wakas. Hazor is located north of the Sea of Galilee. It's a little bit south of the Hazor Basin, which you see circled there at the top, and it is to the west side of the valley. Consequently, that puts it on the foothills of the Galilee mountain range that's north of the Sea of Galilee. It is a strategic site and has been from ancient days. For this reason, you have the north-south Via Maris, the international trade route that runs a little bit inside the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And in the territory of Hazor, there is a branch that leads off both to the Golan Heights, and the Golan Heights overview the Sea of Galilee from the northeast. If instead of heading to the east to the Golan Heights, you were to follow the route north, you would then go up the Hazor Basin and eventually connect with the Bekaa Valley in Lebanon further north. Using Google Earth, we can see far to the south just the northern shore of the Dead Sea. We see the Jordan Rift making its way up to the Sea of Galilee, and then Hazor is located with the pin. Closing in a bit, the combined area of ancient Hazor is both the lateral zone there, it's right under the pin, and then behind the pin there's an agricultural area that would be the lower city, lower in elevation. The upper city is the southern portion, it's higher in elevation. From this picture you can get a sense of the northern Galilee foothills that are off to the left, to the west. More clearly here you see identified the higher elevation upper city and the lower elevation lower city. And now you can see those a bit more closely. The lower portion again is the upper city, and the agricultural zone there off to the upper left, that's the lower elevation lower city. From this shot you can see a dark green divide that separates those two. Keep that in mind, that's quite a depression, and you will see that in some of the later shots. You'll see the fall away into the dark green zone to the north of the upper city, separating the two areas. Bit difficult to tell right here, but below, that is to the south then, of that raised mound, the upper city, is also a fall away as it reaches down to the modern roadway below. All of this, as usual with Google Earth, is oriented with north to the top of the screen. Here's a clearer aerial shot. Notice please that north is now off to the right, so we've had to rotate this. This has a orientation rotation of about 90 degrees. All that we're seeing right now, or primarily what we're seeing, is that higher elevation upper city. So the strip that runs kind of diagonally, you see some excavations. You can see the roadway off to the bottom. And you also can see there off to the left the fall away, the depression, loss of elevation as you move from the upper city down to the roadway. It's a little more difficult from this shot to see how sharp is the depression on the north side of this upper city. Keep in mind then that where you see the blue arrow north, all that field, that is the extended city. That's the lower elevation, the lower city. How much territory does this cover? The upper city, about 30 acres at its base. Upper city, keep in mind, that is that narrower strip that's a higher elevation. Rises about 40 meters, about 120 feet above that surrounding plain. Surrounding plain then would be where the road surface is. In contrast, the lower city, what stretches further to the north, 173 acres. Let's get a sense of the significance of Hazor, relying on various references through history. These will include biblical references. The first mention of this city dates to the 19th or 18th century BC. It comes from a collection of texts known as Egyptian execration texts. These are cursed texts. Execration means they are calling out misfortune against their enemies. Hazor is named in those texts. When we moved to the 18th century, in eastern Syria on the Euphrates River is an ancient city called Mari. It has significant archives. 14 of the documents there refer to Hazor. It's interesting that of the Canaanite cities that are named, only Hazor, along with its king, named Ibn Adad, and Laish Dan, another city in Canaan. These are the only Canaanite cities that are mentioned. Gives us a sense of how significant was Hazor in the 18th century. The relationship with Mari, trading partners. Back to Egypt for the next reference. Pharaohs Thutmose III, and you can see the regnal years, and Amenhotep II, again with his regnal years. There are topographical lists, and Hazor is mentioned in the inscriptions of these two New Kingdom pharaohs. And then come the Amarna letters, also in Egypt, dating to the mid-14th century. There are 4 Amarna letters that mention Hazor. 2 issue from Hazor's king at that time, Abdi Tirshi, and he sends them to his Egyptian overlord. That gives us a sense of the geopolitical situation. Egypt is exerting its control, and Abdi Tirshi is, in essence, a vassal. It's interesting, however, that Hazor's ruler is described as a king, in contrast to other documents that call the local rulers governors. So it shows us that Hazor has some preeminence in this part of the Levant. And now a biblical reference. Joshua 11, there's mention of Hazor, his king Jabin or Yavin. And we recognize here, based on the description, that Yavin is a leader of a league in this upper northern area of Canaan. He's not just an also figure, but he is a coordinator. And in the biblical account, we learn that under Joshua's leadership, Hazor is destroyed. Interesting is, in the biblical record, Hazor is the only city that's described as being subjected to burning. Keep that in mind when we come to the archaeological record. Now, as we move further down in biblical accounts to 1 Kings, and now we're in the time frame of Solomon, roughly 950 BC, we find that Hazor is one of the cities, along with Megiddo and Gezer, which enjoys fortification by public works projects under Solomon's monarchy. And then we roll forward to about 220 years, 732 BC, the Assyrians move into the territory. Neo-Assyrian Empire, fired up by Tiglath-Pileser III, and Hazor is conquered. When we move to the intertestamental period, 1 Maccabees tells of Jonathan, who is an Israelite warrior, and Hazor is one of the places where he camps. Later on in Josephus' Antiquities, he gives a mention of Hazor, and he locates it above Semachonitis. This is the name of a lake which is otherwise known as Hule Lake in the Hule Basin. That lake has since dried up or been drained, but earlier there actually was a body of water there. Now let's get acquainted with the excavations that have uncovered archaeological information from Hazor. First, identification of the site, 1875, jail porter. He comes to Tel el-Kedah, and he references information in the Bible, which tells us roughly where to find Hazor, and also that comment by Josephus that we mentioned just a moment ago. And he says, I have a pretty good hunch that Tel el-Kedah is Hazor. About a century later, a clay tablet was found at Hazor. It's from the Old Babylonian period, and the inscription on that tablet mentions Hazor. 1928, John Garstang, active in other parts of Palestine, comes to Hazor and makes some trial sounding, so not a broad sweep of excavation, but just kind of tapping down in to see what he finds. First major excavations, 1955 through 58, led by Yigael Yadin. Notice some of the other assistants that are with him, because you find them then rising into their own right as archaeologists. Yochanan Acharoni, Epstein Dothan, a couple of Dothans, Ruth Amiran, Dunievsky, Perot, and Stern. 1968, so a decade later, Yigael Yadin comes back, assisted by Amnon Ben Tor, as well as Shiloh and Dunievsky, and they excavate again, and this is known as the fifth season, 55 to 58. There would have been 4 periods of excavation based on the calendar years and seasonal access. So the 5th season is a return to major excavation there at the site. About 20 years later, one of those from the 5th season, Amnon Ben Tor, comes back and conducts some excavations. Amnon Ben Tor engages large-scale excavations in 1990.